Good morning again. It's so good to be here. And yes, I am very busy with the Key Bridge and all the things that we're doing, but I'm never too busy to be here with all of you. It was my thrill, personally, I was thrilled to accept the invitation to be here. So thank you for having me in advance. And John, I want to personally thank you and the county executive for inviting me to be a part of this summit. I also want to thank all of you for being on the cutting edge of electrification and caring so much about creating a better world for the next generation, for our families and our friends. It's so important. So it was only about 7 years ago when I was working at the United States EPA, and I heard the news that the president would roll back most of our federal regulations. It was a gloomy building of sad people, employees who had dedicated their entire life and career was just hurt and upset. And some of these employees literally were there over 40 years. And so I was depressed too. So much so that I resigned after 31 years in the federal government, and I moved on to state government. And that's when my eyes were open. I realized the power, the autonomy, and the responsibility of states and local governments. And it became very clear to me that states and local governments need to actually lead the climate agenda. And when the administration reversed those climate federal laws and regulations, what I saw were all the states and local governments get stronger and more determined to fight for our climate crisis that we are in and remain in today. And I am so happy to be in front of you today as a state regulator, leading Maryland to becoming the first state to meet the most aggressive climate goals in the nation. And after only 5 months of me being into my new job, my agency produced the Maryland Climate Pathways Report that outlined the steps that are necessary to meet our climate goals. And 6 months after that, we issued the Climate Pollution Reduction Plan that focused on 3 goals: to reduce greenhouse gas reduction by 60% by 2031, which are the 2006 levels, to achieve 100% green energy by 2035, and achieve net zero by 2045. And we also focused that report on 8 sectors, but today I'm only going to be talking about the transportation and building sector, because now more than ever before, we need to focus our attention on electrifying Maryland. And not just because of the obvious reasons, like it's good for the planet. We need to, of course, reduce greenhouse gas emissions so that we can stop the advance of global warming, or because we can save so much money on our energy bills. But it's also because we need to improve indoor air quality and safety for everyone, especially those people and citizens who need it most because they don't have control over their situations. And this is why our climate goals are so important, because we need to think about the people who are historically left behind as we're making these big transitions. But we can't do that anymore. I realize that making this green transition will not be easy for anyone, not for businesses, not for industry, not for consumers. It is not easy because there is a big financial commitment needed to make all of these changes. And there is also a need for all of us to do the unthinkable. Change. Change is hard for all of us. Telling everybody or anyone that you need to convert your gas engine to an all-electric one is truly hard to accept. We know that it's true because in Maryland, there are 6 million cars on the road, and only 100,000 of them are electric. That's only 1.5%. That's not a lot, and we've been doing a lot. We've been putting a lot of money in it, so it's just hard to get that change going. And then to convert, to tell everyone that, hey, we need to convert buildings to all electric. Well, that's hard too, because we're used to being and living and doing a certain way. So there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of uncertainty, but I need everyone to know that you will not be left behind in this transition. It is going to take a true, solid partnership between the state, federal, and local governments in order to make this transition happen. And if by chance the federal government fails us again, we need to stick together to fight climate change for our citizens, our consumers, and customers. And our governor, Governor Wes Moore, he is truly committed to being partners with all of you, and so am I. And he's committed to making sure that no one, that means no one, is left behind. So that means, even though I've heard this before, we and I am not in the business of putting businesses out of business. That is not what we're doing. The opposite is true. We want to create green jobs and retrain the workforce to be prepared for this new wave of green jobs that will be created. That's right, going from dirty to clean energy creates 27,000 jobs in Maryland. It's never ever been a win-lose situation where businesses lose and the environmental protection strategy wins. It's a win-win scenario. That's what we're going for. And I also want to give you an example of the governor's commitment. In this year's budget, the Governor Wes Moore, he made a down payment for our climate plan. He put money aside for electrifying buildings and also additional money to electrify school buses, which Montgomery County leads the state on that, and funding for installing electric vehicle charging stations in low to moderate income multifamily and community buildings. And yes, again, the price tag for the climate plan is huge, $1 billion. But our plan, it represents and presents a way for us to raise funds that we need, and the county executive talked about that a bit. The bottom line is that we can generate the funds to implement the plan and leverage hundreds of millions of dollars in private and federal investment. We have already seen this effect with the Federal Inflation Reduction Act and also the bipartisan infrastructure law. But in addition to finding creative solutions to fund the transition, we also need to start educating and incentivizing consumers to switch from fuel-burning products, including vehicles and heating systems, to efficient electric products. Electrifying our fleets, including school buses. Just imagine a world where freight trucks are electric. They're already building this technology here in Maryland. So it's happening now. We are really making progress. Even if you don't see it, we're doing so much. And I do have some good news, actually, that came out of the General Assembly session. Improvements to the Empower Act passed. And it was requiring electric and gas utility companies to achieve greenhouse gas goals and support electrification. We also got legislation to remove an exemption for manufacturers for emissions regulation. And this gives our agency an opportunity to require emissions reductions from cement manufacturing, which is actually a major source of greenhouse gas emissions in Maryland. And also, that industry is already moving toward cleaner operations anyway, so that's all good news. Our state law requires us to achieve 20% reduction in direct emissions by 2030 and net zero direct emissions by 2040. This is not new to Montgomery County. You already have BEPS regulations. And while the law directs MDE to set energy use intensity standards, the newly passed bill, budget bill amendment, it might delay the establishment of those standards, but believe me, we will stay on track. And we also understand the importance of proposing standards that are consistent with the counties, because we need to make sure that we are providing the certainty to the business community. We understand that building owners, as well as energy service providers, they want certainty, and we get that. And we're going to do everything we can to adopt regulations so that everyone knows where to aim. From a broader perspective, our MDE, or at MDE, we established regulations and set the baseline. And we set that baseline for the expectation of all counties. But it's then that we start relying on the 23 counties in Baltimore City to make sure that things get done. So I thank you, Montgomery County, and everyone else who's playing a part of that. I have to say that most of you already know this, but I have to leave with a big shout out to Montgomery County. You are leading the way on environmental protection, and leadership inspires others. You're showing us how it can be done. This is our moment to be bold and aggressive. Montgomery County gets it. Listen closely to this comparison. The state's new climate plan was published at the end of 2023. Montgomery County's plan was published in 2021. Our building performance standards were published this year. Montgomery County proposed many of these standards way back in 2014. Montgomery County has the most buildings of any county covered by our statewide performance standards, which is about 1,600 of the 9,000 buildings. Thank you for pushing us all forward. Let's give Montgomery County. And I'll leave you with this. Please do remember the progress that we are making and why change is so important. Do you remember when depletion of the ozone layer was a big global problem that needed a solution? Do you remember that? The ozone layer is not a problem like it was back then. That's called progress. Acid rain, same story. Acid rain really isn't a big problem anymore. Closer to home, Maryland, this great state, we used to have the worst air quality east of the Mississippi. But last year, we celebrated meeting all of the national air quality standards in every part of the state. And that was the first time since the U.S. Clean Air Act was passed. Now, of course, the fires in Canada came and messed us up, right, with the air quality, but we're trying to change that now. But the point is progress. And as the county executive has said before, we have to keep pushing forward no matter what opposition stands in our way. We have to do the right thing. So I'll leave you with my commitment. We will continue. Here's my commitment to all of you. we will continue to work closely together to reduce the upfront cost of electrification projects in commercial, multifamily, institutional, and other types of buildings. You will not be left behind in this green transition. I am here with you. We will be partners. Thank you.